Good afternoon. I'm Devlin Krupp from the Museum of Philately, and good afternoon to you, Marcus.
Yes, well, as he's already said my name, I don't need to introduce myself, but my name's Marcus Orsi, also from the Museum of Philately. So we're just delighted to have you back. This is the second of, I hope, a series that's going to go on for a long time. So watch this space, but it's great to have you again. Have you back with us again. Look, I was talking to Devlin before we started, and I was saying, well, what are we all about? You know, what's the thing that drives us, Museum of Philately? And the thing that drives us is educating the future of philately, finding new collectors, building a future for our hobby. So we've got this slogan, really: past, present, and future. And today we want to chat about the great collectors of the past. We want to discuss the present day collectors, and we want to use all this in the backdrop of building new collectors for the future. And we've all been inspired by collectors. We've all been we've all felt like we wanted to be mentored by collectors. Some of us have, some of us haven't. There are people in the past that have been mentored. So we're just excited about this new podcast, if we call it a podcast. And just before we start, we just want to acknowledge our sponsors: David Fellman SA, Auction House in Geneva, Switzerland. So I'm going to just say over to you, Devlin. Take it away.
Great, thanks, Marcus. So if we're going to start with the past, it'd be good for me to explain that when I was a young boy, I was inspired by some of the classic collectors. So the names that you always hear, like Count Ferrari, Taplin, and then perhaps the ones in the 50s, Caspari, Barras, all those. I was inspired by those. I read about them, and their names came up, and they had all these legendary items in their collection. But there's one particular collector who probably doesn't get the same level of headlines as those chaps I've just mentioned, and that's a lady called Louise Boyd Dale. Now, if we're looking at an analogy where people have been inspired by collectors of the past, she's a really good example of this, because her father was a legendary collector, Alfred Lichtenstein. And of course, that name's synonymous with the great and good philatelic rarities. But this was a lady who, as a small girl, delivered an impeccable dissertation on the French Bordeaux issue to the Collectors Club in New York when she was just 14. So you could tell that she was hanging out with some of the great collectors that I've just mentioned, and it inspired her. She followed in her father's footsteps. She was the first lady to sign the role of Distinguished Philatelists in the 50s. She was the first woman to serve as an international judge, and also she served as the chairman and on the expert committee of the Philatelic Foundation, which her father was one of the guys who was a founding member of that. But one of the sort of things about this whole story is that she left us in her 50s. She died when she was 54, 55. And she achieved all that at just age mid-50s. Now, she was born in the same year as another very famous element philatelist, John Boker.
Boker, yeah, that's it.
I always get it wrong.
Yeah.
He was born in 1913. She was born in 1913. Both from New York. Both walked the same streets. He lived till he was 90. He didn't sign the roll until nearly 10 years after Louise Boyd Dale. And, he won lots of other medals, but 8, 9, 10 years after her. And you do wonder if Louise Boyd Dale had another 20, 30 years on this earth, what she could have achieved. But anyway, she's a great example of a collector who was inspired by a previous generation collector, and she has been instrumental in inspiring all sorts of ladies all around the world into getting into stamps. So that was somebody that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, well, I want to pick up on something there specifically, and I think maybe both of us we have our own stories, but we were talking about this before as well. Who inspired you, Devlin? Who's inspired me in collecting? What is it that draws us? And I was trying to think about this before we started, and the thing that draws to me is that when you meet a great collector, and I've met a lot of great collectors in the past. When you meet them and you get to understand what they collect, how they collect. Some are postal historians who are fascinated by the roots and rates. Some people are so focused on the plating of a stamp, how the position of the stamp. It could be an overprint, it could whatever it might be, and there's just different aspects of a collector that draws you. But ultimately, it's all about getting to know the past collectors. And you were going to mention Vernon.
Yes, in fact, this was something that came up when we had a discussion with our American friends on Conversations with Philatelists, and that was Vernon Roberts is a guy that not many people have heard of, but he is a collector from the late 1800s who was inspired, and he said he went on record as saying he was inspired by Thomas Taplin and the work that Thomas Taplin did in getting one of the greatest collections in the world together, and that caused him to get into stamp collecting. And he went around hoovering up lots of rarities. I mean, he had the Bombay cover in his collection, but he was inspired by Thomas Taplin. And just something that you just reminded me of, Robson Lowe is another guy that I was inspired by as a young man, because he produced a lot of books, and he sort of brought to the forefront postal history. It was something that we were all into stamps, and he coined a phrase which I love, which describes sort of philatelists and postal historians. He said that philatelists are scholars of engineering and postal historians are scholars of humanity. And wow. I love that phrase. Absolutely. And I remember sort of leafing through some books that were produced by Robson Lowe, thinking, wow, this guy is unbelievable, because he really did sort of innovate and change the way that stamp collectors thought. And he kind of brought in this whole new thing, postal history. It became like a proper thing. I know that these collectors we've mentioned, they had covers in their albums, but often it was to show usages. They were much more into the engineering, the perforations, the watermarks, the printing, whether or not it's in a different state. So yeah, Robson Lowe's a guy that's quite inspirational to many people from my generation, and indeed he coined a phrase which I think is quite accurate about the different mindsets of a stamp collector and a postal historian.
Well, we're trying to keep these chats to to 10-15 minutes, but we're going to move on this now and move into the subject of past, present, and future. And with the help of Devlin, we at the Museum of Philately have been producing a series of articles about collectors of the past. And I just wanted to get, some insight into what has driven Devlin to do these articles, because he's been the brains behind it. What's driven him to do it, and then what's exciting about what's coming up. What have we got to offer coming up in the future?
Yeah. So just in case people out there don't know, David Feldman asked me to write a set of articles on collectors, and I said, look, it'd be really great if we could start with the classic collectors and call it legendary collectors. And we've literally started from the start of collecting, and we've been working our way through it. And I think we're on number 24 now. I've already written 32 of them, but basically these are all people that are an inspiration. They're legendary collectors in their own right. And so what we've wanted to do is just share some insights about them and about how they got into stamps and what they had in their collection. But what we're trying to do is bring that into the sort of like the modern day. And so through the Museum of Philately, we've started a new series, which is called The World's Greatest Collectors of the 21st Century. And we've now written and published on our blog one of these about Anatoly Karpov, who is a modern day philatelic legend. He's still with us, still collects Imperial Russia and Olympic Games. That's right. He sold his collection on Belgium through David Feldman in 4 auctions back in 2011, 2012. But he's a modern day legend in the philatelic world, but also he's a famous chess player as well. So yeah, what we're trying to do is just bring the past all the way to the present time. So with this series, we'll start to highlight some of the current day collectors, and the hope is that this will inspire the next generation of collectors. That we will see the Karpovs of the future say, well, hang on a minute, yeah, that's inspirational. I want to get into stamps. So that's kind of our thought process behind it, Marcus.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, what's going to be great too is we're going to be publishing these through the Museum of Philately website and through the blogs. So we're very excited about all that, and excited about what one of our projects would be to actually interview a real live collector and hear from him and hear what he has to say. So I would say watch this space. So I think that's all we have today. Devlin, you've got a couple of things to say before we end.
Yeah. Well, thank you for watching, and please do tune in to any of our other episodes. We've got one we've done before this, and obviously we're going to do a few more. If you want to know more about us, then please go over to the www.museumoffphilately.com. Find out a bit more about these collectors that we've talked about and their collections and the rarities that they had in their collections. And if you want to contact us about anything that we've talked about today, whether you've got a question or some information you want to share with us, then do that through the contact page on the website. And also, if you want to, we're going to be starting a newsletter in April, which you can again go on the website and say, look, I'd like to receive this monthly newsletter. So please do that. But in the meantime, we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.